What is sickness? It's a very important question for a health practitioner. Normally, sickness is an imbalance in the body. We say it's a disharmony somewhere between the mind, the ideas, between the heart, the feelings, and between the behaviors, the actions. Health is a coherence between what I have in my mind, the way I feel, and what I do with that as a behavior, as action. Do my actions reflect what I have in my mind and my heart? Do I act against my heart? Do I act against my mind when I have to do something? So most of the time, when we study very well the secret mind of an individual, health is related to that congruence between these three components of the body. I can give you an answer as a naturopath. When I studied naturopathy for 5 years, we learned that cancer is the result of an anarchy between the cells. And the contamination from the cancerous cell with another cell, and then at the end we get a tumor, we get the formation of a mass that is cancerous. And that is what I've learned. So this is why all my work in naturopathy consisted in detox, diet, whatever that can help to create an harmony in the body. But I noticed that many times, whatever the good diet, the good work, it never worked. Until I discovered the work of Dr. Hammer. What is cancer? Since I work with that now, the cancer is a response of the automatic brain, a response to an important stress that the person went through. We say a cancer is like an optimization of a function in the body in order to respond to that stress. So a cancer is a special program from nature, a special program from the brain to optimize the efficiency of an organ. We call that a cancer is a turbo function in the organ. For example, if I have stomach cancer, it's because I need more cells to digest something that was difficult to digest for me. Why do people get cancer? I'd like to give 2-3 different answers. When we study, when we go to see a medical Western doctor and we ask him, why do I have cancer? And he will use the statistic to let us know that, yes, we are among the statistic this year that will get that type of cancer. But they barely can provide an explanation. And as soon as we ask the doctor, why do I have that cancer? He's embarrassed to answer because since he practices, since university, everything that he learned in university and his daily practice doesn't match. But he's lost, he doesn't know how to answer properly to that question. And then when we study with people who have cancer, why do people have cancer? It's because people, they went through an important trauma a little bit before their cancer where they felt stuck. They couldn't elaborate the solution at the moment. And cancer came always after such an event in the person's life. Is cancer a curse or help from nature? I've studied with Dr. Sabah, who is an expert of the brain. And what we know now is our automatic brain is connected with 4 million years of life on Earth. And that brain is monitored to find solutions in order to maintain our survival from moment to moment. And then what's interesting is, once you know the meaning of cancer, you realize that it's never by accident that we get cancer. It's always a response to something very specific at a moment of our life. And it looks like a curse from a medical viewpoint, but when you know the meaning of cancer, and when you know that it never comes by accident, it's fantastic to discover that. Because from the moment we think it's a help from nature, we discover in the person's life the exact conflict to match the type of cancer that they have. And this is why we can say, in appearance, cancer was a curse in the past, but today we can say, no, it's a solution in order to optimize the person's chance to survive. And it's what we we need to find out with the client. Is cancer a deadly disease? Honestly, with my background, I work with many doctors. Yes, it can be a deadly disease. Yes, but once we don't know anything else. And what is interesting is, if you learn from people who believe it's a deadly disease, it can be a deadly disease. But if you study with people who knows the meaning of cancer, maybe you have a chance to change your perception on cancer. Cancer is a deadly disease in a certain way because for about 60 years in our system, as soon as we hear the word cancer, it means death. In that way, it's a deadly disease. But once we understand that it's a response from the brain to a specific program or a stuckness that I had facing a solution and facing a problem in my life, certainly that from the moment I understand why I have the cancer, most of the time it attenuates the impact of the cancer in my psyche. Because as soon as I find why I have cancer, that is a response to something very specific, curiously, it changed my perception of cancer. Cancer has been and is still a deadly disease in the mind of people because they don't find the purpose of it. But from the moment they find the reason why, curiously, the perception on cancer changes, and we have noticed that many people who first thought they would die from it, they survive because they realize that it came at a special time to help them to survive. And as we understand why we got cancer, quite often this is the way out to heal from cancer. Why do people die from cancer? I would say it's not a simple question to answer. But some people die from cancer because first, they are in extreme fear at the moment of the diagnosis of cancer. Because if a person has in his family somebody who died from cancer, in the previous generation somebody who died from cancer, they have to believe that when I have cancer, I die. And then when we study other family trees, we discover that some people die from cancer, and then some other generation after that with the same disease, they heal. So what does that mean? That means cancer is not the same for everybody. It depends the way we react to the word cancer. It depends also what we do with the information of the word cancer or with the diagnosis. If after the diagnosis I go in terrible fear and I'm scared to death, of course I have a chance to die from it. But if right after the diagnosis I question why I have it and I meet with somebody who can help me to talk about it and to help me to pinpoint why I have the condition, quite often I transcend my fear of dying and then I have a chance to shift to another level, and then cancer does not kill me. But if I don't do nothing with this information, if I don't share it with anyone, if I swallow it with fear, yes, cancer is still a deadly disease. Does cancer kill the person at a cellular level or at a somatic level? Let's say both are possible. The first possibility is a person that developed a cancer because the person didn't resolve an important conflict in his life. So the cancer comes as the brain's best solution to keep the person alive at first. But if the person remains in ongoing active conflict that has created the condition, and this conflict gets worse, normally the disease in the body is proportional with the intensity of the conflict. So if, for example, a tumor is developed in the body and it keeps growing because the conflict keeps going on, that tumor can take some proportions that are important and create some secondary effect where blood circulation, where nervous information in the body can be threatened. And it's possible that the person dies from the secondary condition of the cancer. But also a person can die from the primary cancer if the cellular multiplication keeps us expanding endlessly and create a mass that is almost unmanageable for the body. So this is always possible. Right? And it's what medicine observes on the daily basis. And then, do we die from cancer from a psychosomatic viewpoint? Most of the time, it's what happens. From the time the person gets the diagnosis of cancer, we say the diagnosis multiplies by 1,000 the gravity of the disease in the psyche of the person. And it creates even a secondary conflict in the mind, which seals the primary conflict underneath the cancer. And it's like if it creates a shield that does not allow the person to get out if the person does not have a chance to talk about it. When I studied Dr. Hammer, he said that 90% of the diseases and 100% of the aggravation in the world is the consequence of the conflict of the diagnosis. And I studied that on the paper and in my class, and then I had many clients. And what is interesting now, I always ask my clients, how did you hear about your diagnosis? Which word did the doctor use? How did you see that in your mind as you heard these words? And most people say, no problem. And then you push a little bit the person, and the person talks about fear, terrible fear. And you push more, suddenly the person had the vision. At the moment of the diagnosis, quite often I have clients that they saw themselves in a coffin with the family around with flowers singing a song. And it's very frequent I have that. And if this does not come out in the first 2 sessions with the brain of the client downloads that into the subconscious and will deliver that to the client eventually. It's an important risk of death behind the condition. So we never banalize the conflict of the diagnosis. We honor that and we talk about that. It's mandatory for all therapists. What is my viewpoint of metastasis? And what is the viewpoint of, for example, my mentor, Claude Sabat? It has been said many times that first, when we talk about metastasis, I studied in my book as naturopath that metastasis is when the cancer overlaps an organ, contaminates another body tissue, contaminates other cells in the body, and even can migrate to other organs. I've heard that a lot of times. I studied that on the paper. And then when I started to work more with cancer, I've learned and I've observed that metastases do not migrate. It's a belief that science let us believe. But when we study with a science laboratory technician who has made the research of metastasis in laboratory, they don't have any single proof of the migration of the metastasis from an organ to another organ through the bloodstream. Simply, you know why? Because the cancer of one organ is under the control of the brain. The principle of metastasis cannot be possible that will leave an organ to contaminate another one if it's not coming from a program from the brain. So it's fundamental to keep that in mind. Normally, we say metastasis can exist, but not in the way we think. I'll give you a common example. A woman has a breast cancer, and then we remove the breast without resolving the conflict underneath breast cancer. Then not long after that, we discover that she started to have bone cancer behind the breast. And then when we study the tissue of the bone, we find the tissue of the breast in the bone. Why? Is it a metastasis? No. Because the woman didn't clear her conflict, homeless conflict related to breast, the brain commands the cells of the bone behind the breast to mutate and to give the cells of the breast, like if she had a breast. That, yes, is a metastasis, but based on the mutation of the cells in the organ. And that, we have observed that a lot. I would say that a metastasis is always linked with secondary conflicts after the diagnosis, or the person becomes ill, the person feels that she's ill, and she starts to invent a scenario in her mind that she might die. And then, at that moment, yes, the second fear or the second stress, the third stress, can contribute to promote the creation of metastasis in different organs. We have a question quite often, what is a malignant tumor and a benign tumor? Normally, what it is observed in my work is that a malignant tumor is a tumor that we observed in the conflict active phase of the conflict, where the person needs an optimization of the function in the organ. At that moment, if we have an analysis, we can observe a malignant tumor at that moment. So for that, we need to study the different type of body tissue. For example, when we study intraductal invasive breast cancer, which is a cancer that comes during the repair phase, we can observe a malignant tumor in the repair phase. But at the end of the repair phase, what was the malignant tumor? After that tumor has repaired the walls of the duct, that tumor starts to shrink and becomes benign. A benign tumor is an indication that there was a conflict before where the tumor was malignant and the person has resolved the conflict consciously or subconsciously, and the brain keeps a trace or a memory in case it needs to make it malignant again because the person has another similar conflict. So finally, a malignant tumor is because that's the moment we need to optimize the function of the tumor, and a benign tumor is some memory of that I have resolved an important problem. How does that work when a client is diagnosed with cancer and in his mind he's gonna die? As soon as the client has a fear to die, it normally contributes to create a secondary cancer in the body. Why? Because the person sees himself subconsciously in a coffin. So as soon as I imagine death in the back of my mind, that means I'm gonna die. So my brain, in order to optimize my chance to stay alive, produce a cancer in the lung alveoli, in order to optimize my capacity to breathe. As I can breathe, I can stay alive. And then this is why it's very frequent for someone who got diagnosed with a cancer that a month or two later we discover a secondary cancer. And we say, now the cancer has contaminated your lungs. And then the person is diagnosed with lung cancer, with the primary cancer that was, let's say, maybe liver cancer or colon cancer. But it always follows the fear that the person had at the moment of the diagnosis. So, and if that fear perseveres, if the person does not talk about it, it becomes a big balloon in his mind, and the brain is obliged to download the conflict somewhere into the subconscious. But at the same time, it triggers the lung alveoli. This is why it's very frequent to observe an adenocarcinoma of lung not long after the diagnosis of the primary cancer. Now, can we say that the cancer is a specific biological program from the brain to play with a different function in the body? Normally, we say that if I have cancer in my body, it's under the control of the brain. And nothing happens in the body without the agreement of the brain. Sometimes in our life, it has been observed that the tumor grows in the body because I need it. And without doing anything, 1 month later, it has been observed that the tumor decreases. Why? Because my brain monitors constantly the stress that I'm experiencing in my life. And it has the yo-yo effect. That means my brain will download in the body as my stress increases, so the tumor might increase. And as my stress decreases, my brain monitors that and says, oh, I don't need that much in the body, so my tumor decreases. Many of us have such kind of reaction And we survive that simply because it's never has been diagnosed. And we have observed many times that many of our ancestors, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, when we make an autopsy, the guy in the autopsy discovered that these people had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 cancer in their life. But they never been diagnosed. And this is why they survived the cancer. Does the X-ray tissue, under the form of cancer, has a function in the body? I give you the common example. Right? Somebody has been diagnosed with an adenocarcinoma of the stomach. And then when we see that on the analysis, we notice that adenocarcinoma is on the greater curve of the stomach, which is made of endodermic tissue, and that's the part of the stomach that produces hydrochloric acid. And it's interesting because more the tumor increases, more the hydrochloric acid is concentrated and strong, which allows to digest the morsel in the stomach that the person couldn't digest. And that morsel is real, symbolic, imaginary, or virtual. So yes, the growth of the tissue is to respond perfectly to the demand of the brain to clear the issue that is stuck in the stomach by the automatic brain. If the real quest for the cause of cancer was in the mind of the researcher, it would have been discovered a long time ago. Dr. Hammer has discovered it in 1978, after the death of his son, and many other people have corroborated his research, and then many students, many other doctors have discovered the cause of cancer. It has not been officialized yet, but eventually it will be. But for now, I'm not shy to say it's a shame to see all these millions and trillions of dollars invested in, at the expense of people who have suffered all their life with these conditions. In laboratories, people make research on cancer. They study the cells of cancer. They take some cancer cells from a certain part of an animal, and they insert that in another animal, and they observe what is going on, and they draw their conclusion. They never consider that the cancer cell in an animal is under the control of the animal's brain. If you take these cancerous cells and you put that in an animal that does not have the conflict, it will never have the same repercussion. This is why these studies on animals and on other beings that has nothing to do with the conflict behind cancer, you can't never go anywhere with this research because it does not respect the logic of cancer. A cancer is under the control of the brain. So this is why it doesn't work, this research. Can we understand cancer in a materialistic way, or we need to consider the emotion, the mind and the soul? I think if we consider just in a materialistic way, we're beside the point. Because in all observations that have been made on cancer, there's always, even the people who are quite materialistic, they have observed that there's always an emotional trauma underneath the cancer. There's always an overwhelming conflict that has preceded a disease. And many doctors in their office, they observe that all over. They just don't know what to do with this information because they didn't learn that in university. Can cancer be prevented? Normally, if we have the right education about cancer, we understand that cancer is an ongoing stress that has not been resolved, or an overwhelming stress, very punch, that was not resolved. So yes, it can be prevented if we have the education. With the education, as soon as we are overwhelmed, as soon as we're shocked with something extremely important to us, the education is to talk about it, Prevention for cancer is to break our isolation at the moment of an important stress. Most people in our society do not learn how to break the isolation, how to break the silence, how to talk. The first thing is to talk and to find a way to express a repressed anger, a repressed emotion. And that can be a very good way to prevent cancer. And we know that behind cancer, there's a lack of congruence, lack of coherence between my mind, my heart, my feelings, and my actions. So the moment I become aware that I'm not in harmony with myself, it's an alarm, it's a sign of wake-up call. Okay? So, and I think we can learn that. We can learn that even in school. We can learn that through exercise of relaxation, yoga, or simply exercise of common sense and self-awareness. German medicine and Dr. Hammer's idea behind cancer is the most amazing discovery of this century. For me, it's fantastic. And it explains, for the first time, someone found a system to explain why we have cancer. And I think if we were in a fair world, Dr. Hammer should have already received the Nobel Prize of Medicine and maybe other Nobel Prize of Research in a laboratory. It's amazing what he's discovered. And then it's an important discovery for all of us because his discovery is replicable, reproducible everywhere in the world. Me, I married a Chinese woman. Huh? I work in China, in Japan, I work in Vancouver, Canada, across United States, and some other places in Europe. It's always the same. Behind cancer, I can check that the theory of Dr. Hammer is right. Sometimes the conflict that we discover, different conditions and behavior, are not written on the chart of Dr. Hammer, but what we discover is very close of what is on the chart. Sometimes it's just a nuance that makes it a little bit different, but it brings us back always to the essence of what he discovered. For that, I think it's fantastic, and I think all the doctors should know the work of Dr. Hammer. People ask, why I have cancer? Why? And then most people in medicine don't know what to answer. We're statistic, we are, it's the hazard, by accident, and then we come and we say, one of the most important work behind recall healing, total biology, German new medicine, is to help the client to understand why he is ill. And we realize that behind that illness, there is a story, a life story based on his daily life. Okay? And this client is not a statistic. And this is why we cannot help people to heal, because we put everybody in a statistic. We say this year, 1 woman out of 8 will have breast cancer. Yes, but we forget that each woman has a story related to the wholeness. And if we work on the story, the emotions behind conditions and behavior, quite often we get to the resolution of the conflict that has initiated the cancer. This is why it's important to keep the generality, but also to do a close-up on one-on-one private life story. We have to stop the use of statistics to put everybody in the same basket. Why do researchers never find the right answer? Because they study the case of the person. They study cellular tissue in a laboratory disconnected from the person who has it. It's connected with a brain, and we forget to study the one who has initiated it. We just study the expression of it. How can we get to the right cause if we don't study the real person behind? Okay, it's a nonsense. It's impossible to find the answer in laboratory. Never, 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 because it's the biggest aberration that I know in science. There is a conscious interest at a very high intelligentsia in big pharma not to allow this discovery known. all what we talk about right now is known. It's very well known at a very high level, but they cannot make money with that. People are still looking for a magical cure. Huh? You know why people want to look a cure? Because people still looking for an answer outside of their body, outside of themselves. When you have a spiritual master, the first thing he asks you is how you feel. Where are you in your mind? Where are you in your consciousness? And I think with an ill person, we should do the same thing. Because that's, for me, the core of the answer to find a solution is this one. We express a disease from inside based on what we have been unable to resolve. We never caught an illness from outside. So the solution will be the same, has to come from inside. This is why whatever researchers try to do, they research outside. If they research inside, in the program that has created the condition, they risk to find. But they might find. This is why they don't research there.